Hello everyone, welcome on this beautiful spring day. I'm very happy today because after almost a year break I finally went to the hairdresser, and as you can see the result, my hair are exactly the way I like them to be, wild and curly. I love curly hair. I never straighten my hair, so this is the way I want them to be. Plus, if you haven't noticed, I've changed my hair color a bit. I added more red streaks, so I'm very happy. But let's get to the main point of the video, because today we have another episode of my videos, and today I will be talking about season 3 of Downton Abbey, and you will probably see a wide grin on my face through most of the video, because season 3 is my absolute favorite season. I think that it is the best season of Downton Abbey because there is so much going on. Plus, I believe that every show has a moment, a peak, the best moment, and I believe that this was season 3 for Downton Abbey. After season 3, the show, in my opinion, went a little downhill, mostly because we lost 3 very important characters, Matthew, Sybil and O'Brien, because the actors playing those characters didn't want to renew their contracts, so they just left the Abbey, and the show was never the same again. I was talking about it in some of the recent posts in the group, so you know my point of view about the subject. And today, as always, I want to say a few words about every episode of season 3. So let's start from episode 1. Episode 1 is very important and crucial for Mary and Matthew fans, because finally, after 2 seasons of them arguing, breaking up, dancing around each other, pretending that they don't care about each other when in fact they were really in love, they are finally getting married. Everyone is happy about it. Downton is on the highest alert because everyone is preparing for the most important wedding for them, wedding of Mary and Matthew. But in the meantime, we also have sad news, which Robert receives from Mary, that the money, almost all the money that he had from Cora, are lost because he invested them in a railway, and the railway failed. So we found out that Robert lost all the money, which can ultimately bring Downton down to the point where they will have to sell the castle and move out. So the joy of Mary's wedding is overshadowed by this news, and I have to say that I'm very much amused by the scene, which seems totally unrealistic to me, where Robert tells Cora that he lost all her money, and she reacts saying that she doesn't care because she's an American and have gone and will travel. I find it very unrealistic because I think that most women would react in totally different way, but of course that's fiction. In season 1, also Sybil and Tom come from Ireland for Mary's wedding, and we find out after short investigation that Violet paid for them to come to Mary's wedding. And Martha Levinson, Cora's mother, appears in Downton, played by Shirley MacLaine. I'm not a huge fan of Shirley MacLaine in that role. I love her as an actress in other movies, but not in Downton. But I will not get into the specifics of that. Maybe someday I will make a video about each character separately, so we can talk about it then. And in episode 1 of season 3, we also find out that Matthew can probably inherit a lot of money from Regis Wire, and he doesn't want to accept the money, and he tells Mary about it, but Mary finds out that they are ruined and they will have to leave Downton, so she argues with Matthew about not accepting the money, which causes that they almost, break the whole wedding thing. But in the end, Anna advises Mary that she should go with the wedding because she will never find a man like Matthew again. So this is the whole most important thing of episode 1 of season 3. Then we have episode 2, which is very funny because Martha is still at Downton and everyone are fed up with her. Everyone are just having enough of her. And we have also, there are many new characters in season 3. So we have Alfred, the new footman, which is O'Brien's nephew. And he's the reason why O'Brien and Thomas, who were earlier thick as a thieves, as Robert once described them, they are beginning to argue because O'Brien asks Thomas to help Alfred to develop his career quicker, and Thomas denies the request, and O'Brien starts to be very malicious towards Thomas. So, for example, she's hiding Robert's shirt in episode 2. This is a very funny scene. I love it. I love the malicious side of O'Brien because I can see a little bit of me in O'Brien. I like to be malicious from time to time, as you know. And in episode 2, there is a main focus that Mary and Violet decide not to let them move away from Downton Abbey, and they think that Martha can help them financially. So they are plotting all the time. They want to give a wonderful dinner to, show Martha how Downton matters, how it's amazing, beautiful, and should stay as it is. But they have no idea that Martha figured out what they are trying to do, and she has no intention of helping them. Plus, on the way, there are obstacles like, the furnace in the kitchen of Downton Abbey is being broken. And we also have a very sad thing about episode 2, where Mrs. Hughes finds a lump in her breast and she doesn't know what it is. And she tells Mrs. Patmore about it. This was very sad. She's very worried, and I can understand her because last year I had a very, very similar scare, and I know how awful it is, and I know how important it is to have someone close to you in such moment. So this was a sad plot, but I love that it brought Mrs. Patmore and Mrs. Hughes closer together, and they became great friends, because in the beginning of the show they didn't have a very good relation, but then they become friends because Mrs. Patmore is the only one that knows about this lump, and she's the only one who is waiting with Elsie for the results, which will tell whether she has cancer or not, because Elsie doesn't want to tell Mr. Carson about it, but he finds out about it in episode 3, if I remember correctly. So this is very interesting plot from episode 2. Then we have episode 3, which is absolutely fantastic. I think this is my favorite. If I was to pick the favorite episode, it would be episode 3 of season 3. Let me tell you why. There is Edith's wedding in episode 3, and as we all know, she practically, maybe I don't want to say forced, because I think that Anthony Strellan was really happy with Edith and they could have been happy together. I think that they were getting along very well. Of course, he was older, but for me it's not an issue because I always liked older men. But this sad thing with Edith's wedding shows us how unfortunate Edith really is. She really doesn't have a very easy life. She suffers a lot seeing her 2 sisters being happily married, one pregnant, and she feels left out. She also wants that kind of life. She wants to have a husband and children, but that's not meant to be for many years later. But in the end, in this episode 3, we also have all this plot with them preparing for leaving Downton, and Matthew and Mary still arguing about him accepting the money from Regis Wire. And ultimately, by the end of episode 3, Matthew finally decides to accept money from Regis Wire. And it all ends well because they don't have to leave Downton, they have money again, they can invest in the property and stuff like that. And of course, the best, absolutely the best plot from episode 3 of season 3 is Mrs. Hughes finding out that she doesn't have a cancer. Of course, you have to forgive my wild smile, but whenever I'm talking about Elsie or Carson, I'm just having automatically a wild smile. So she finds out after a long time that waiting for the results, she finds out that she doesn't have cancer. And in the meantime, Carson finds out that she's maybe gravely ill and that she's waiting for the results. But he doesn't tell her that he knows about it. So basically they are, hiding that knowledge from each other. So when she finally finds out that she doesn't have cancer, and she goes back home, and Mr. Carson is coming to Mrs. Patmore asking her if this is cancer or not, and she tells him that it's not cancer, and he's sighing with relief. He goes to his pantry and he starts to sing Dashing Away with the Smoothing Iron, and Mrs. Hughes listens to that, standing outside his pantry, and she has a wide smile on her face, just like I have now. For many of you, this was the moment when you realized that there is something more between Carson and Mrs. Hughes. For me, it was much, much earlier. I suspected that from early episodes of season 1. But for many people, this is the moment when they see that there is an affection growing between Carson and Mrs. Hughes, which ultimately, as we know, goes to the moment when they are getting married. So episode 3 is fantastic. Then we have episode 4, in which Matthew starts to realize that Downton is being mismanaged, that there is something going on with all the improper spending of money and stuff like that. In the meantime, of course, we see Anna visiting Bates in prison, trying to make him free. We have all this plot with Mrs. Bartlett, who lies about things just for Bates to stay in prison. We have Murray taking care of this business. So episode 4 is also very, very, very interesting. And then we have one of the saddest episodes in Downton Abbey, and this is, I forgot to add, in episode 4 we also have, of course, Tom coming back from Ireland in the middle of the night during this famous dinner with the Archbishop, during which Robert again expresses his bad feelings about Catholics. I always feel a little bit offended by that because I'm a Catholic, but I don't want to get involved into that. So Tom comes back from Ireland, and Sybil comes a day later, and we find out that Tom is very much involved in Irish destroying of private property of the aristocrats. And Robert is having one of his famous angry outbursts. And I'm very much with Robert on this because, as I told you a few times before, I'm absolutely against any form of communism. I grew up in communist country, and communism is one of the worst things that can possibly happen for the people. So I'm very much with Robert on this one. And in the meantime, Tom finds out that there is no way that he can go back to Ireland because he would be imprisoned. So whether he likes it or not, he and Sybil have to stay in Downton. And we have episode 5, which is tragic because, as we know, Sybil unfortunately dies giving birth to little Sibby. I had to tell you that because I don't have a lot of knowledge about pregnancy, labor, birth, because I never had one. So it was a big surprise for me to know that there is something like eclampsia, because I wasn't aware of that before. I didn't know that it was a condition which can ultimately kill you during childbirth. So that was something new for me. And the most tragic moment, I think, is that because initially everyone, the Sibby was being born, the doctors were fighting. Dr. Clarkson had different opinion, Dr. Tapsell had different opinion. Robert supported Dr. Tapsell because he was the rich one. He had a practice on Harley Street. And as I told you, the worst part for me was that in the beginning everything looked well because Sibby was born and Sybil seemed to be okay. And then suddenly in the middle of the night she got this attack and she died at the age of 24. So that was a very hard and difficult moment for everyone. For me, the most touching scene is, of course, Cora and Tom crying when Sybil dies, and also when downstairs people are being woken in the middle of the night and given the news, and Daisy starts to cry, and then Mrs. Hughes goes to Mr. Carson, and he's also devastated because he knew Sybil all her life. So that's the saddest episode in the whole series. And in episode 6, meanwhile, we have some of the new characters downstairs. We have, as I mentioned, Alfred, O'Brien's nephew. We also have new footman Jimmy Kent, very full of himself. We have Ivy, kitchen maid. So there's the beginning of this whole foursome downstairs, which I'm not a great fan of, but maybe I will talk about it a little later. In episode 6, we have some kind of a continuation of the grieving process in Downton, because Cora is very angry at Robert and she blames him for Sybil's death. And this is very... I have been through a grieving process recently, and I know that during the grieving process we tend to blame someone for this. If we don't want to blame ourselves, we want to blame someone else. So Cora and Robert are not talking to each other, and they have a great crisis in their marriage because of this unfortunate Robert's decision about listening to Dr. Tapsell. And Violet sees their crisis and she decides to do something about it. And she asks Dr. Clarkson to tell them that there wasn't a chance for saving Sybil, although it's not entirely true. But ultimately, it causes that Robert and Cora are speaking with each other again, and they can grieve the death of their youngest daughter together, and that's great. In the meantime, we have famous lunch prepared by Ethel with Charlotte Russe. When Robert finds out that Ethel was working as a prostitute, so he just comes to Isabel's house demanding all his women to go back to Downton, but they refuse. So this is a very, very nice scene. And then we have wonderful episode 7, when there is first moment when Tom and Matthew are beginning to talk about the possibility of cooperation, because Tom doesn't know what to do. He doesn't know if he should stay in Downton. He says that he wants to leave, that he wants to take Sibby to go away. He invites his brother, the drunken gorilla, for the christening of Sibby, and he also asks Mary to be the godmother for Sibby, and he wants to move out of Downton. But Violet gives Robert a very excellent idea that Tom should replace Jarvis, the manager of Downton. And this was a great idea. I always wish that we could see more of cooperation between Matthew and Tom, because they had very good ideas. And in the meantime, we also, no, that's an episode 8, so I'm not gonna go forward. But during the christening, Tom finds out that he's going to be the new agent, and he accepts this proposal. And of course, again, we have Robert not wanting to go to the christening because it's Catholic christening and all this stupid stuff like that. And the ending scene of episode 7 is very funny, because we see when Violet and Robert are taking a photo with the baby and the priest, and they are just like looking like they are, I don't know, some kind of weird situation. And Cora tells Robert that, is he afraid that he's going to be converted? That was really funny. And then we have beautiful, wonderful episode 8. I love episode 8, the cricket episode, as I always call it, because I don't know a lot about cricket, but all the Downton men are looking beautifully in the white clothes. And I will tell you what I already probably told you a few times in the group. This is kind of interesting fact. In real life, Jim Carter, who plays Carson, he was a president of Hampstead Cricket Club for many years, so he knows a lot about cricket. So this is funny scene where Mosley is trying to show everyone how good he plays cricket, and he tells by the table of the servants of Downton Abbey that he knows everything about cricket. And Carson is laughing, and he says that he's beginning to be afraid. And that was very funny for me, because I knew that Jim was a president of the cricket club, so that was kind of an Easter egg hidden. And this beautiful cricket episode, I absolutely adore this episode. I think it's very full of good emotions. In the meantime, we found out that Mary and Matthew had problems with conceiving, because there was some small operation that Mary had to go through to be able to get pregnant. And she's being told by the doctor that for a few months she will probably be pregnant. This is also the episode where we meet Rose for the first time. I'm not a fan of Rose. I don't like her. She annoys me. Even later, when she's beginning to be a better person. But I think that she was a kind of a filler in the show. She was supposed to replace Sybil. She was supposed to be, the modern one, the fun one. And in the first episode, when we are meeting her, she comes to Downton and lives with Violet, but she almost immediately wants to go to London with Edith and Matthew. And we find out that she probably has an affair with a married man. She goes to a nightclub with him. She spends 2 hours at his apartment in London, during which the taxi driver waits for them for 2 hours. So I think that they had an affair. So we find out that Rose was being a rebel, the wild spirit of the early 20th century. And I always say that she was a kind of opposite to the Crawley girls, who were raised, in the country, so they didn't know a lot about London life besides the season. So they were spending their evenings in home with their family, eating dinner, while Rose was the new generation, dancing in the jazz clubs and things like that. And also we have some Rosamund in episode 8, and I like Rosamund very much, so I was happy that she was also a part of this episode. And the whole episode ends with the cricket game. In the meantime, we also have Matthew, very good scene where Matthew makes Robert realize that Downton is being mismanaged, and that if they will not change how it is being run, they will go bankrupt again and they will have to sell Downton Abbey. And Tom, Mary, and Cora support Matthew, and they all decide by the end of the episode, Robert, Tom, and Matthew are having like an agreement that from now on they will just act differently. And then we have the last episode, episode 9, very meaningful episode for a lot of you, because we are losing two characters. We are losing O'Brien. We are losing O'Brien maybe in season 4, because in the first episode of season 4 O'Brien is leaving. But we are definitely losing Matthew by the end of the episode, so I will talk about it a little later. Episode 9, again, I'm smiling. This is how much I like season 3. Episode 9 and 10, this is the long episode. I love this episode. It's so fun again, so full of good emotions. Well, I'm not talking about the end of episode, because we all know what happens at the end of episodes when Matthew has a car crash and he dies. But the whole episode before is very hilarious. We have Joss Tufton, the admirer of Mrs. Hughes, who is very gross but very funny at the same time. We have this wonderful, the family is going away to Scotland, so we see beautiful Scottish views, and I love Scotland. I absolutely love Scotland. Scotland is on my bucket list, and if only my financial situation will improve a bit, the first place that I will go will be Scotland. I love everything about Scotland. So seeing those beautiful views from Scotland was just amazing. And we meet Rose's parents, wonderful Shrimpy and awful Susan. We find out a bit about why Rose is having such a hard life with her mother. And there is this wonderful ball, the ball for the servants, and the Gillis ball, as they call it, where again downstairs people are having fun, and we have famous Mosley dance where he gets drunk and he's being wild at dancing. This is a great episode. We have Mary being very high pregnant, but still risking things like going in the carriage and things like that. And we have servants who stayed in the house and they are going to the fair. There are a lot of adventures on the fair. And my my absolute favorite is Mrs. Patmore, who is having a lot of fun, but at the same time we find out that Mr. Tufton is just, a sleazy guy, and he wants her to marry him, but she refuses. And then by the end of episode we have this great scene where Mrs. Patmore and Mrs. Hughes are laughing together from Mr. Tufton. And in the meantime, Mary is coming back to Downton earlier because she feels that maybe it's time for her to give birth. And she's being taken to the hospital straight from the station. And in fact, she gives birth to a baby boy, George. Very, very happy scene. Everyone are happy because everyone, that they have the next Downton heir, they have the male heir. That was very important for them. So everything is going well. And at the end of episode, unfortunately, Matthew goes into the car crash and dies because Dan Stevens wanted to leave the show. Why did he do that? I will never understand, but I'm not him. It was his decision. I bet he regrets it. But it caused that many Matthew fans were truly devastated. I know that there were people who stopped watching the show. They were blaming Fellows, even though it was not Fellows' fault. Fellows wanted Dan Stevens to stay, but Dan Stevens decided to just walk away, and that was it. So guys, again, a long video. You have to forgive me, but I really I could go on and on for another hour, but nobody would watch such a long video. So again, I'm very sorry for talking for so long. I hope that I'm not boring for you and that you still would want to, watch my videos describing the seasons. And next week we will talk about season 4. So thank you for being here with me and have a great day. Bye.